Hello and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones. I pastor this church, Northwood Christian Church, where I am recording this right now in this very moment. And I do this not only for those who might benefit from these thoughts and reflections and hopefully inspirations that I may have, but also I do this as part of my preparation for the words that I'll share with my congregation this coming Sunday, or by the time that you're hearing this recording this past Sunday. All of this to say, I want to make you aware that if all you do is listen through a podcast or watch on YouTube, that's great, and we're so happy. But I also want you to know that these recordings just scratch the surface, or let you in to peek through a window of a congregational life that's filled with people and their stories. And you'll occasionally hear me reference them in my little talks, but who I'm talking about when I do that is a group of people that have coalesced together around the teachings and model of Jesus Christ. And I bring all of this up to emphasize the fact that you can, should you want to, meet us in person. We worship at 1045 on Sundays at 4550 Central Avenue in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we would love to meet you in person. And now is a good time, too, as we are smack in the middle of a time when we're planning what our next acts of service will be, where the rubber meets the road, where our faith meets action. And we're eager to take what we've been learning about from the gospel and to put that into action so that the world may actually be transformed. And we do mean it. Transformed. We believe that Jesus called us to a better life, not in some sweet by and by or in some futuristic sense, but right here and right now. So we invite you into this work. And if you'd like to connect with us, the best way would be for you to reach out to me directly. If you're not going to come on a Sunday morning, we would love for you to reach out to me directly at my email, which is my name, Heath, Heath, at indyncc.org. That's INDYNCC.org. Or if you're not looking for something so direct, perhaps just peruse our website or find our YouTube page if you haven't already, and check out some of the live recordings of our Sunday morning worship. Simply search for Northwood Christian Church and the word Indianapolis in YouTube search bar, and you should find our church's specific YouTube page, distinct from the one that you're watching this on right now, probably, which is my own personal YouTube page. Subscribe to both, by the way. Moving on, I'd like to recognize the All Indiana Podcast Network. They produce our podcast, along with many other podcasts recorded in Indiana, and often about topics of interest to Hoosiers specifically. Hoosier being that funny little word that we have given ourselves as our name, and no one knows what it really means. Either way, if you are from the state or from the outside and just curious, please check them out. There's something for everyone, even if you aren't from Indiana. And the topics range from sports to politics to religion to gardening. They run the gambit from super serious to super silly. So please peruse them at your leisure. You can find them at www.wishtv.com/podcasts. That's wishtv.com/podcasts. Lastly, before we move into the meat of this episode, here's your friendly reminder to like, subscribe, or follow us by way of whatever app you use to find us. If it's YouTube, subscribe to our channel. If you're watching this right now, just pause and subscribe to my channel or our church's. Or if it's by some other app that you use to access podcasts, please like, subscribe, or follow us, depending on whatever term your app uses, gets the same job done. And please give us a rating, hopefully a positive one, but either way, helpful information, either way, because these points of engagement between us and our audience, even like the comments, the thumbs up, whatever, they increase the number of people who might find our podcast, because that, I'm told, actually, I think we've experienced, that sorts this video into whatever queue the algorithms that the wizards of the internet have cooked up. And so your liking and subscribing and commenting help the internet funnel this video to more places, because it gives it the impression that people are interested. And I hope that you are. So please, like, subscribe, thumbs up, comment, whatever, and this will help our channel out quite a bit. Moving on, here in a moment we'll be considering a parable found in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 25. But first, we need to pause for some ads for our podcast audience. If this means you, we'll catch you after the break. 2, 3, and we're back. And today's scripture passage is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, and we will be reading verses 1 through 13. It's Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13, and it reads, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 young women took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, 'Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out and meet him.' Then all those young women got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise replied, 'No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves.' And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other young woman came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he replied, 'Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" Every now and again, I'll find myself drifting through YouTube videos. Maybe that's what you were doing before you started watching this one, but it's a sort of the virtual equivalent of twiddling our thumbs, isn't it? But you've done it, I've done it, probably you've done it. I do it, and sometimes my eyes will light upon a video within minutes or hours of starting, and sometimes the video is hours long of vintage TV ads. Some are very old, of the Where's the Beef variety, black and white or early versions of color, and then some are newer from my own childhood, ones I can vaguely remember watching growing up. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, to give you some frame of reference, which, if you think long enough about it, should call to mind an old classic. And I'm thinking here of the "This is your brain on drugs" commercial. I'd be sitting there on a Saturday morning watching my cartoons when a man with a super serious voice talked over a disembodied hand holding a single egg. The voice would say, "This is your brain." The child would then note the whole intact egg. Then the voice would continue, "You know it. This is your brain on drugs." And the hand would then crack the egg over a skillet, emptying its contents out into the pan where it would sizzle and pop. And the point was clear, probably to us all. It was certainly clear to me at the age of 10. The point seemed to be, if you do drugs, whatever drugs, your head will crack open, your brains will fall out and then sizzle as if over a fire. Now, this is nonsense, of course, that if you take drugs, your head will explode. Your head will not explode. Even the serious drugs will leave your skull more or less intact. And while many drugs used for recreational purposes have many detrimental effects, I'm not aware of any that will turn your gray matter into a literal pile of sizzling egg white-like goo. So upon retrospection, my peers and I have found these commercials to be a bit, how shall we say it, over the top, exaggerated, extreme, which was on purpose, which was the point. The point was to jar, to rattle, to catch my attention, but to jar my 12-year-old self into an awareness that some drugs will wreck your life. While they may not literally fry my brain, like the commercial more than suggests, some will addle my thoughts and fundamentally change me, sometimes in very unpleasant ways. And maybe you have a relative. I suspect that you, the listener, will know someone who struggles with or has succumbed to an addiction. Or maybe you yourself struggle with an addiction or succumbing to. Or maybe you found freedom from. Either way, you know that this is serious business, which is the point of the commercial with the egg. To take it too literally is to miss the point. I say all of this to make an important point about Jesus' parables. They, like the Your Brain on Drugs commercial, use over-the-top imagery and bombastic language and wild imagery to hammer important points home. For example, in the 16th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells a parable about a rich man and a poor man named Lazarus. If you know the parable, you can call to mind how the poor man and the rich man both die and find themselves on the opposite sides of a chasm, the rich man being in hell and then Lazarus being in the arms of his ancestor, Father Abraham. And the parable depicts the rich man's suffering in the afterlife after having lived a life of greed and callous disregard for a poor man outside of his door. That would be Lazarus. And some have latched onto this parable's descriptions of the experiences of the rich man and Lazarus after their deaths, as if Jesus' goal here was to give us a literal description of the afterlife. You know, like Lazarus really being held by Abraham and all that's in that striking parable, not only metaphorical, but literally true. But this is to miss the whole point. In the story of the rich man and Lazarus, Jesus is telling us a story meant to highlight the dangers of greed. And he does this by telling a story where the stakes are sky high and the differences between the right and wrong choices are a mile apart as that chasm in the story. And this is to force us to a pivot point, a pressure point even, to a moment where we make a choice. Will we choose the hellish ways of greed and materialism, or will we choose the life-giving ways of God's realm, as Lazarus did? You don't even need to believe in a literal hell to get the point. Like the egg in the Your Brain on Drugs commercial, you don't need to take it all literally to get the point. I say all of this after reading a parable from Matthew chapter 25. Where Jesus is telling us a parable meant to function in a similar way to what I've been describing. So let's get to it. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven, or as I say, the realm of God, both good ways of translating that phrase, will be like this. 10 young women took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. So right out the gate, already, the metaphoric imagery should be grabbing you. We know from other places that Jesus spoke of the coming of God's realm as if it were the culmination of a wedding day. Some of his other parables even have a wedding feast as the punchline, like this one. And in fact, the writer of Revelation will picture a great feast banquet at the end of all things as where this is all heading. So this language in this metaphor is rich and part of the culture in Jesus' time. And it's to describe a place where all present enjoy the good things that party has to offer. And this is to represent the realm of God when it comes in full with all the good that it has for us. And you can read this description of the realm of God in various places where Jesus spoke of it. I like what he said of God's realm in Luke chapter 4. Frankly, that's my favorite Bible passage in Luke chapter 4, where he quotes Isaiah and describes from Isaiah the ways the realm of God liberates captives, binds broken hearts, and alleviates the suffering of the poor. But if we were to stick just with the Gospel of Matthew, from where this parable comes from in Matthew chapter 25, then perhaps the best description Jesus gives is found throughout his famous Sermon on the Mount. And this sermon comprises the entire 5th through 7th chapters of Matthew's Gospel, one speech with what people have described as Jesus' greatest hits, in that he describes the ways the realm of God will serve to comfort and restore all that may be restored and comforted in the end. And Jesus claimed, this is important, to bring this realm with him, so that it is already having its transformative effect on the world, bringing healing and comfort to a hurting world. And what's left for disciples, once we've entered into this space with Jesus, this way of being, what's left for us is to let this light shine so that others may see by it, the light we found there. Or to quote another portion of that same Sermon on the Mount from chapter 5, verses 14 through 16, it reads, "You, church, you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hid. People do not light a lamp and put it under the bushel basket. Rather, they put it on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Today's parable is all about this light. And it is meant to convey to us the importance of always being ready to let it shine in every season of life. Jesus likens our experience to that of these 10 women who are waiting for what? The arrival of the bridegroom, which for the early church meant the arrival of God's realm in full. Some have framed this event as the second coming of Christ. Either way, the church waits for the world to be restored. In like manner, these 10 women wait long into the night. Have you ever had to wait at the reception for the bride and groom to finish up with their pictures? Maybe you're at the place where the reception is and the food is sitting in the warmers off to your right and the mints and the nuts on the table, well, they're no longer cutting through the hunger, and that's bad enough. But these women in the parable have been waiting, and now the hour is midnight. And in this hour, midnight, carries significant meaning in apocalyptic literature. And this is an apocalyptic parable, not meaning a parable about the end of times, but rather a parable that does what that word means. Apocalypse means to reveal or to unveil something that is hidden. So this parable is meant to reveal to us the dealings of God in the world. And midnight in apocalyptic literature is that late hour when you're beginning to wonder if the one you are waiting for will ever arrive at all. And in this case, we mean God's help. Midnight is a long way to morning, but by then, it's already been dark for many hours. So this timing, using midnight as a metaphor, fits many of our experiences as the world has long seemed troubled, and the sunrise sometimes seems like it may never come. The point is, Jesus is trying to help us relate by way of this story to something we are all experiencing in one way or another. We are waiting through tumultuous times for some form of relief or some help to arrive. Does that describe you? It describes most humans, I think. Similarly, these women wait for the bridegroom. But the hour is late, and half of them never anticipated waiting so long. So they lost patience, and they ran out of oil, and then their light went out. So now, oil. You've heard a lot of talk in this parable about oil, and by the time Jesus told this parable, oil, as in oil that you'd put in a lamp in your house, that kind of oil and light, had become metaphors for good works and deeds. That's what's alluded to in what the passage I read earlier from Matthew chapter 5, about letting our light shine by our good works. And Levitical law required that the people would always keep an oil lamp burning in the temple to remind them of this, that they were a people whose good works and deeds were to shine out for surrounding peoples to see, a light to the nations. The lamps and the lamps and the oil in today's parable function in this similar way. We should recall the lines that we read earlier that I just alluded to in Matthew 5 about the disciples being the light of the earth. In other words, in all times, others should be able to look to us to see shining examples of love that's been put into action by way of serving those who need help. That's the oil, that's the light, that's the works, and that's what people see. Work done in the name of love. But there is this caveat. While we toil in the meantime, we anticipate a time in the future, we hope soon, when the realm of God will be realized in full. When the sorrow and suffering we see in this world will cease. Ceasefires and global conflicts, no more hunger, the dream. As I was saying, we are told that good times are coming. But we, like the women in today's story, have been waiting for so long. And many of Jesus' disciples believed that they would live to see the coming of God's realm in full, which they didn't. But as time went on, some became less sure, as you can understand. Some began to doubt if it would ever come, and so they let their lights go out. Even in the time of Jesus, they lost their fire, some of them. Perhaps they thought, what's the point? The world's been this way as long as we can tell, and our parents say it was this way before they got here. So let's just lie down and take a nap, metaphorically speaking, of course. In our parable, it's quite literal. They go to sleep, and when the groom arrives, they're caught off guard. It's like catching my kids playing when they ought to be picking up their room. but once I get there, too late. It's as if to say, you cannot manufacture courage, resiliency, and the determination to stick to the good fight which that oil and that light represent. You either have to discover that you have those things in the context of the struggle, or you discover that you don't. And those 5 women who kept their lamps ready represent those who stuck to the good fight, even in the dead of night, even as midnight approached and overwhelmed them, even when it felt like their help would never come, even when they just had nothing to do but doze off and go to sleep. They still kept the good works, the oil, the light, the good work in the world. They kept it going in the face of the darkness. And the 5 who were not prepared and let their lights go out, well, these represent those of us, me too, who lose heart or focus, or more likely, we've grown complacent or resigned to a world that is spiraling out of control. In modern times, perhaps this parable should conjure up images of complacent consumers biding their time with leisure and distractions until our life's close. And these, us, we, when we're in that frame of mind, we miss the realm of God when it arrives because we're so consumed by the concerns of humanity's old ways and its diversions and distractions, its hatreds and its fears and all that goes with it. So consumed by that we miss the good when it arrives. Again, remember the egg and the drug prevention commercial? All of this that I'm describing is a metaphor. All of this is extreme. And all of this is meant to put us on the edge of our seats and ready to make a focused decision. Chances are you or I do not fit with either one of these extremes. Our lamps are not wholly dry of oil or very full, but somewhere in between. We've just grown a bit complacent. We've not wholly checked out, but let's just say that we have been discouraged of late. And this parable then casts the choice as a decision between 2 polar opposite directions for our lives. Things may not be quite that dire, but that isn't the point. The point is to force us to make a choice to recommit to the good work that needs doing in this world in the name of Jesus. And so we are given these 2 opposite extremes: no oil, light out, darkness, versus full on light, let it shine. Strive for one pole or the other, and the parable finds us at a perfect time. Dare I say providential time. I'll stick with perfect for us at Northwood. For right now, in this season, as I speak, we are deciding how we may let our light shine. It's as if we are sitting torn between this decision and this parable, wondering if we will go towards the light or continue to sit on our hands. And we've just spent weeks considering some of Jesus' teaching regarding money, possessions, and resources, with the question before us, how is God calling us to use these resources to get up and to walk and to do good in the world, to let our light shine, to fill up our lamps with oil, to create around us the world God desires, one where, at least in microcosm, the poor are fed and clothed, and where a community is healthy and where enemies are reconciled. Peace, joy, laughter. We want it all at Northwood. So we've been discussing these things with the question, how can we use what resources we have to bring a little more light into the world? And now this is beginning to sound like the discussion today's parable is wanting us to have about how much light we have left to shine. But I said at the conclusion of these talks just last week, the series on possessions and on stewardship and all that, if you've been following, I said at the conclusion of all of that talk about our money and our possessions that none of what we say matters unless rubber meets the road and faith is put into action. If we don't put our faith into action, we are as the women in today's parable who were caught unawares by the arrival of God's realm, clueless whilst missing the blessings we were made for. This describes me on my worst days, I'll admit it. And if it describes you, there is good news for us all. Jesus has invited us all to wake up. The parable concludes, "Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." That last line places the arrival of God's realm as maybe imminent, or maybe not. We don't know. But we should not be caught napping. Keep up the work. Fight the good fight. Because even though you fail, fight the good fight. Because our help is coming. It has come for us before, and it will come again. In the meantime, stay awake. It may be midnight, but it is time for us to keep the fires burning, keep our light shining. Even as it is enclosed by the darkness in our world, fan the flames in the face of it. The sun will rise after long nights, as it often has in the past. But while we wait for the sun, stay awake and stay on fire for good. Keep love alive in your heart. God's realm is already here in part. Have you experienced it? No? Well, hold on. Your help is coming too. In the meantime, don't fall asleep on the human race. Stay awake and let what light you have shine for all to see.